Thank you, Chairman Graham, Ranking Member Leahy. I am so grateful that you've again convened an important hearing on this pressing issue, and I'm particularly grateful for our panel today to Dr. Jewett, Mr. Srochak, and first among our witnesses, Mr. Vladimir Kotomatsa. Thank you for your courage, for your persistence, you and your wife, for coming forward again and again, and for giving witness to this long pattern of violent repression of dissent in Russia, of the violation of basic commitments of democracy and of law, and sadly, the practice of targeting political dissidents with tragic consequences. As you remarked, Vladimir Putin won his first presidential election, March 26, 2000, and just this week, coinciding with the 17th anniversary of that, thousands of Russians, tens of thousands of Russians, took to the streets, including Alexei Navalny, an activist who defied bans on peaceful protests, some of the fiercest anti-Kremlin protests, anti-corruption protests in 5 years. All of us in elected leadership in the United States and in other Western democracies should be clear in our response in condemning the detention of peaceful protesters, in advocating for the core value of free speech, and insisting that the Russian people deserve a government free of corruption and accountable under the rule of law. In recent weeks, as others have remarked, we've seen Nikolai Gorokov, the lawyer who represented Magnitsky, thrown from the 4th floor of his Moscow apartment. And just yesterday morning, 2 reporters for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, correspondents were beaten and robbed by masked assailants in southern Russia in an incident that appears to have been orchestrated by local police and is a reminder that members of civil society, that journalists, face a constant pressure across Russia. Your pointed question to us was, do you choose to engage or to turn away? And we've had conversations about the consequences of the proposed budget if it were enacted and the reasons why it should not be. And I am grateful for a chance to join with Senator Rubio in a resolution naming the street in front of the Russian embassy after Boris Nemtsov. And I'm particularly grateful for the strong leadership of our chairman, Senator Graham, and the Russian Sanctions Review Act and the Countering Russian Hostilities Act, which are broadly bipartisan and deserve to be taken up and enacted. Let me ask the entire panel, if you would just speak for a moment to what are Putin's most effective tools for meddling in the politics of the United States and the other countries, and how can we best mitigate the impact of this Russian interference? How can we, to meet your question, best engage and actually fight back to be more effective in partnering with the Russian people, in partnering with European allies, in partnering with a commitment by the United States to engage and push back?
Thank you very much, Senator Coons, and I want to use this opportunity also to thank you for co-sponsoring this bill that would name the spot of land in front of the Russian embassy here in Washington, D.C. as Boris Nemtsov Plaza. It's very important for us because back home, the authorities reject any suggestions for commemoration of his name. They rejected petitions and initiatives to put even a small sign or something like this. And in fact, every night now, almost every night, the Moscow authorities and the Moscow, with the help of the police, basically steal the flowers and the candles and the portraits of Boris Nemtsov, the people who live at that bridge where he was killed 2 years ago. They destroy this unofficial memorial almost every night. Of course, the following morning, there are new flowers and new pictures and new icons and candles. People don't forget. So the popular memory lives on. But for now, we have no way of commemorating Boris Nemtsov in our own country. So we're very grateful for this initiative that you co-sponsored along with Senator Rubio, and I hope this succeeds and this will happen. Of course, it was also the US Congress that set this precedent with Andrei Sakharov Plaza back in the 80s. So I very much hope that this succeeds, and we're very grateful for it. On your question, I think one of the most effective ways that the Putin regime is trying to exert its influence is frankly through the export of corruption. Because unlike in the Soviet times, again, when everything was done by state actors, I mean, there was nothing private in the Soviet times. Everything was connected to the state, so in a way it was easier to see it. Now it's much more difficult. And some of the things are not done by state actors directly, through affiliated entities, through supposedly quote-unquote private businessmen, but of course who do the Kremlin's bidding. And they have done this for years and years. I mean, we do have some cases, as Mr. Srochak mentioned, there was this multi-million-euro loan from a Moscow-connected bank to the French Front National, the far-right party. But these are rare cases when we actually have open evidence. In most cases, it's clandestine, it's hidden, it's done through supposedly business schemes or offshores and things like this. So I think the most effective way would be to put a stop to this export of corruption and to say that this dirty money and this money that in fact was plundered from Russian taxpayers, because as Chairman Graham noted, Mr. Putin's official salary has very little relation to all this massive wealth. So there's little doubt that this money is not legitimate. And I think it's important that Western countries and Western financial systems not serve as havens for those money that are also used in many cases to exert influence outside.
Thank you. Doctor?
I would add that an effective response, I think, needs to start with an acknowledgement from the top of government and down to the grassroots that there is an urgent national security threat that's being faced. It has to be publicly acknowledged. There has to be a commitment to a public-private collaboration to addressing it, and a commitment to straightforward communication with the public about what's happening so that people can defend themselves and protect themselves from the assault. We're seeing this kind of response in Estonia and Lithuania and Latvia. We're starting to see it in the Czech Republic, and I think those will be some of the most effective kinds of responses when there is that very public acknowledgement and agreement to collaborate.
Thanks, Senator, for the question. I would agree with both what Vladimir and Laura have added, but I would maybe make a couple of more points. It's extremely important to recognize it for what it is, and to call it what it is, and to work with political parties and leaders to give them the skills to get in front of the news cycle, get in front of the fake news stories. The Lithuanian government, I think very recently in this story about alleged rape by German soldiers under a NATO flag is a great example of how a government and the allies together can work to get ahead of a story and kill it before it becomes viral. Excuse me, I would say also providing funding to NGOs who are finding a way to network political leaders together and enable them to share their own experiences. Political party, it's remarkable to me in Europe today how few political party leaders have direct experience in understanding what the Russian Federation has undertaken in other countries. And if we can find a way to share those experiences among themselves, that enables them to develop legislation to push back, for example, by limiting foreign funding of political party campaigns. And I would say also to provide assistance where we can to foreign governments in their efforts to stand up institutions to push back against Russian interference. For example, in the case of the Czech Republic, what has just been created in the Interior Ministry there on January 1st of this year is an interesting model. It may not be a perfect model, but it's a good model that could be replicated in governments across the region, and we should encourage that.
Well, Mr. Sorochek, Dr. Jewett, Mr. Kara-Murza, I just want to thank all of you. Mr. Kara-Murza, you said in your introduction that you were poisoned by an undefined toxin. I appreciate your clarifying for us. You're defining the toxin with which Western democracy is currently being poisoned, which is a combination of corruption, of disinformation, of sustained hybrid warfare. Thank you for both your service and sacrifice and for helping make all of us stronger in the face of this toxin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.